Hi, this is Corine with Mom on the Right, and I am ecstatic to talk to Tho Bishop from the Mises Institute. He is a political analyst, an assistant editor, and he knows what's going on. And girls, I'm telling you, that Green New Deal just blew me out of the water, but yesterday no one voted on it, as Mr. Bishop is going to be able to go into. And where do we go from here? What kind of deal are they going to come up with now? What's going to happen?
Well, this is not an issue that's going away. I mean, it is amusing to see no Democrat wanting to put any fingerprints on this at all.
Right.
I was great to see Mike Lee treated this entire idea with the degree of respect that it really deserves.
Yeah.
And I think especially it's going to be interesting with the 2020 campaign going on. I think you're going to see a rush to see, who can take the furthest left position on the environment as a way of really rallying the base. Of course, we're seeing play out in France is that actually once you see individuals actually start seeing the cost of some of these ideas, even at the very margins, voters themselves don't tend to really like it. But this is, I think, it's just the beginning on this whole thing, and it's going to be interesting to see where it goes from here.
If you're AOC, what are you doing now at this point? How are you gathering the troops on her party to support her on maybe a watered down version of this?
She's definitely going to have fun. I think continuing being, the spokesperson for the more militant left on the environmental side within the House. Right. What's interesting though is that everything she did here strategically didn't make a lot of sense. You saw this with kind of the rollout in the first place, right? Where they came up with this document, then they spent the weekend trying to pretend that they didn't really unveil it, even though it was on her website.
Yeah.
You had to, like, this is, the corporate press being the enemy of the people, right? I mean, you had media members bending over backwards trying to act like they weren't lied to explicitly by her staff, which I just find very odd. But I think that, this isn't just AOC though either. You have some Senate support already there. Every single presidential candidate has endorsed some form of Green New Deal. They're going to, I think, try to start making climate change a constant voting issue. And that's going to be something that the Republicans are going to have to start addressing too, is that how do they have a good message to communicate and respond to this? Because if they simply ignore it, I think simply ignoring it is not going to work in this modern day and age. They have to be prepared to go on the attack. Right. If they simply ignore it, then slowly but surely the left is going to be able to moderate their stance and make gains, whether it's pushing some of the very harsh federal requirements on increasing on emission standards, some of the retrofitting stuff. If the GOP simply stands still, which unfortunately this is what the Republican Party has done such a good job in the past, is that they let the left define the spectrum here. And they got to get on the forefront here and start showing how all of these issues, the government solutions are going to make are not a solution to any of the ends that the left claims to care about. So we'll see how this all plays out.
What is the general consensus in your circles? Because you're right in the middle of it. You write about it. You're interviewing people about it. What's the general consensus right now in the inner circles in Washington at this point?
Well, what's interesting is that I really think, in many ways, I appreciate the honesty of AOC's approach to this.
It's both.
She's very forthright. I mean, this is kind of the progressive ideal realized, right? The progressives, going back to Wilson, right? They had this dream of reorganizing American society, kind of along militarized grounds. And so if you actually read the actual text of AOC's proposal, right, it all harkens to, oh, well, if we could organize, things in World War II to defeat the Nazis, then what can we stop? What can't we do? And because what she's really proposing here, and what the left fundamentally is discussing when they take these very broad and ambitious plans, is a complete restructuring of American society. And so I think that the Democrats, many in the Democratic leadership were surprised at she was saying the parts out loud that you're supposed to keep quiet in many ways. And that kind of is playing up to this general friction that I think you're seeing AOC play out. It's funny, you still see the press talk about her rising popularity when a lot of polls show that in New York she's tanking in that regard.
They're like 30%.
Yeah, it's she is, this is very different than a couple months ago. So it's as the campaigns, the whole thing is that Washington, there's going to be nothing substantive done in Washington for the next 2 years or next year and a half, right? It's all political posturing. I mean, you'll get some things done at the margins. It's all positioning itself to what happens after 2020. And I mean, now we'll see what healthcare goes. I mean, that's a whole different battleground that's being opened up there.
I mean, if you did that at your job, you would lose it. You don't just stop in the middle.
Oh, if you simply submitted this proposal to, the way that it was written, it was the quality of a college paper, that would not get that wouldn't be worthy of an A. But right. It's a new time in Washington. What's interesting is the trying to price this whole deal, right? You had the American Action Forum, trying to treat this as a actual piece of legislation. And their estimate came to about a $93 trillion price tag over the first 10 years to cover just simply a portion, and the majority of what was outlined in this plan. And then our own Robert Murphy, who is one of the best environmental economists out there, along with work for the Mises Institute, he works for the Institute of Energy Research. He had an article recently that outlined how this was actually a conservative estimate. And as he put it, like, what we're seeing here is not really a policy proposal to address concerns about climate change. Let's assume for a second that the concerns here from the left are totally on the up and up. In economics, we don't have to know the underlying motivating factors of a policy to be able to judge whether it can achieve its stated goal. And if the stated goal is for carbon emissions and trying to modernize the economy in a way to decrease carbon emissions and try to come back, nothing in here actually solves that issue, right? If we want to have a conversation about upgrading nuclear, if we want to talk about ways that we can cut down pollution, and then you can look at how developed economies end up being far more environmentally friendly than other ones. Nobody on the left wants to handle the fact that all they're proposing is that Africa would never be able to enjoy the quality of life that Americans have because forget about air conditioning and the emissions that come from that. The massive prevention of quality of increasing their quality of life. If you actually see this policy come into place on a global scale. They don't want to touch any of that. What this Green New Deal is simply a way to throw every single progressive dream, from universal health care to jobs guarantees, to massive public works projects, right? Like, this wasn't even an attempt at environmental policy. It was trying to use this great specter of global warming to justify a pre-existing policy position. And again, it's going to be interesting to see how much the left is able to keep on that message. And then when you see them break off and how bad the actual environmental regulations they do propose end up being.
Yeah, it's the hypocrisy, I mean, and as you know, and you pointed it out in your article, these are big dreams. The hypocrisy that she's going to tell me not to have a hamburger and then be in Washington, D.C. having a hamburger and coming out of a gas-guzzling SUV.
Right.
I mean, this is the hypocrisy, and I think, as you said, like, this is going to be great for the conservatives to kind of run with it. I don't think Nancy can control her girls in Congress, to be honest with you. I don't know
what we're seeing is the same way that the Republican Party leadership had to try to deal with the Tea Party rebels.
That's right.
And it caused all sorts of heart issues there. Yeah. And unfortunately, the Tea Party movement kind of diminished over time, and that's a different topic. The difference is, though, is I think a lot of the activist left may have a greater upper hand within the Democratic Party simply because you have so much long time established powers that the game has changed, right? The Republican Party has had, for the longest, since Newt Gingrich had term limits, right, in their leadership. And so that meant that you had a lot more new blood coming into leadership positions. Well, you don't have that in the Democratic Party. I think they may have put it in place with the that's how Nancy Pelosi helped get the votes that she needed to be speaker this time. But what that means is that you essentially have a lot of dead wood that's in leadership positions. And this new wave of Democrats, the true believers, if you will, are out for blood. And the activist base, I think, is AOC better embodies your average Democratic voter than Nancy Pelosi does by a mile.
Absolutely.
And that's going to be a very difficult situation. Nancy Pelosi, for all of her sins, she's a very talented politician, especially in the smoke-filled back rooms. That's how, when people are talking about, this new wave, they're going to really challenge Nancy Pelosi for speaker. Like they don't know how Nancy Pelosi works. But I don't know if when the entire voting base is changing, and we saw that with AOC's election in the first place, I don't think that this isn't something that Nancy Pelosi's really had to force to deal with in the past. And you're seeing it highlight rifts on questions like Israel, on questions like Medicaid for all or Medicare for all, on questions like the Green New Deal. So it's going to be very interesting to see whether the Republicans can get out of their own way in this regard and let the left eat the left. But again, that's why election season is going to be a lot of fun.
It is, and it's job security for everyone, isn't it, my friend? I had a question, and I would love your thoughts on this. I was an 80s kid, whatever, so I knew about the Cold War, and I had an idea about socialism, and, being under Ronald Reagan at the time. And do you think the next generation now, more and more young people are supporting socialist ideas? Is it because they don't even know about the Cold War and so forth? Is that accurate to say?
I definitely think so. And I think there's 2 points here.
Yeah.
One is that, I think she was in Time Magazine. Again, I hate to just keep harking on AOC, but to her credit, she's really changed the political conversation. AOC talked about how millennials and people her age have never, really enjoyed the benefits of capitalism, and this is why you see this radical revolution. Well, the lack of gratitude and just no appreciation for actual hardship, right? The poorest millennial in America lived a far better life than your average than the millionaires of 100 years ago, right? Or their concept of, the thing is that they've been sold this idea that socialism has been modernized and that it's best demonstrated today by countries like Sweden and Norway and Scandinavian countries.
And then there's Venezuela.
Right. And so they don't want to ignore Venezuela's not real socialism. Or even better, they point to, the hardships that Venezuelans are suffering from today is because of U.S. sanctions, right? And then that's what's tanked the country. It was like, no, this is, we've had several Venezuelan scholars come to the Mises Institute and talk about their own experiences and how they've watched their country crumble. It's horrifying. The good thing, though, is that I think that what motivates a lot of Americans is not ideology, right? And so that means a lot of people who I think are sympathetic to socialist ideas are sympathetic only because they have been they have this misguided belief that, if it works for Sweden, why can't it work for us? I don't like healthcare being as expensive as it is. I would like some greater degree of certainty than I have. I'm burdened with these student debt costs that I'm struggling to deal with. That is kind of a little bit of a different issue. And so why wouldn't we try to find different solutions, be pragmatic about it? Of course, what we have in Scandinavia is not socialism, right? And in fact, the gains that we've seen, especially in countries like Sweden, were more free market reforms that took place in the last decade plus. So they're sold this very false narrative. But I think this is encouraging because what it means for us on the right, for those that want to defend capitalism, is that we have to identify areas where we are seeing actual gains being made. We have a young scholar here at the Institute as a fellow who's working on his PhD. He's from Lithuania. Lithuania is a fascinating country because, he was born in the Soviet Union.
So
so then they had it, they got independence from the Soviet Union. Then so they're looking around and say, okay, we now have freedom. And now we have to embrace this capitalism thing when, we've had decades of markets being a bad word. What's next? And so all their factories were centrally planned to serve some sort of need that the Soviet Union had, like nails and shoes. So how do we go from making subpar nails and shoes to competing in this global marketplace? So they had to figure that out. And so now Lithuania is one of the fastest growing countries in Europe. How? It's because they realized, okay, well, we don't get to play the same sort of shenanigans that Washington can by cooking the books. They can't borrow debt at 100+ debt to GDP the way we can. They couldn't rely on the federal on monetary policy to bail them out. They had different limitations that basically depoliticized their monetary policy. So it's okay, well, if we want to get companies from Germany to come here, we have to lower our taxes. We have to be more competitive. If we want to, we have to educate our children better. We have to outperform. And yet they've had the success. And so I think identifying Switzerland is another example of a much more of a country where politics plays a smaller and smaller role in their economy. Not everything they do is perfect. That's fine. So I think for us to combat this, the idea that we're simply going to be able to hand out, copies of Ludwig von Mises or even Economics in One Lesson, which I highly recommend all of your viewers read. It's a fantastic introduction. Economics in the U.S. is taught so poorly that I don't have a great amount of faith that we're going to be able to just convert the masses with that alone. But if we can identify real world examples, I think that we can make some of those similar gains that take advantage of the same points that have benefited socialism. And that's why I think leadership within Republicans in the U.S. becomes so important, right? I'm from Florida. What the Florida government has done is really exciting. And Ron DeSantis is providing some very exciting leadership down there where they're trying to address matters like healthcare through a market lens. They're trying to become the most competitive and freest economy in the state, and people are fleeing there in droves. The more that we can point to actual success stories, I think that's the best way of confronting socialism to so many of these people. So that's why I'm a lot more optimistic than what the polling would tell us, because our ideas do work. And the more that we are able to highlight examples of markets working, I think that we can get people back on our side. And the great thing is that, everything that we are living in a very decentralized world. And that's what tech has opened up for us. And that's a testament to the beauty and the incredible creation of capitalism. So we're living in the world that millennials enjoy is a capitalistic world. They just have to be reminded of that and see and be shown that. And so that's our challenge.
And it's a big challenge, and you have your work cut out for you over there at the Institute for sure. What would you tell if you could talk to Donald Trump's team in any capacity, what would you recommend as far as, advice going into, for the 2020 campaign? As they're, like you said, we're all gearing up for it. What would you tell him at this point?
Oh, well, I think one of the big things is a lot of what he ran on, it was always shocking to see because, I found Donald Trump entertaining, but I didn't expect he hit on a lot of really interesting topics during his campaign. I think continuing with his own instincts on foreign policy is a big move. I think that a lot of the coalition that's more kind of the independent coalition is motivated by foreign policy still. And so just because Donald Trump can so little, I think a lot of Republicans are going to be lockstep with Trump, right? The beauty of it is that, if you were a never Trumper in 2016, and we've seen this play out, I think, with a lot of conservative commentators, right? The left has made it so that, you have to really, really loathe Donald Trump to even think about sitting this one out. So it's going to be, how do you win those swing, truly independent voters, and particularly those in Michigan and Ohio and Pennsylvania. And so that's why I think the uniqueness of Donald Trump as a candidate, building this really kind of nonpartisan coalition in the first election is so important. So continue with his foreign policy promises. And if he can end up working the deal out with North Korea, which is back and forth, that's always what North Korea does. I think that'd be really good. If he can get a deal done with China, so that he can that allows him to claim a victory there and remove the tariffs that I do know have big impacts on places like Iowa in particular, and another one of those important swing states there. Mm-hmm. I don't think this is anything I think this is what they're aiming for. So, I mean, I don't think that they need my advice for that at all. What's really concerning for them is simply that the global, well, the other side is that the spending issue that he's embraced. He's made it hard. It's a shame, and unfortunately, you so often see this when Republicans end up having control of all levels of government, is that they're great about complaining about runaway spending when the minority party, when they actually have something to do with it, they don't. And it's easy to bash Trump for this, but a lot of Trump's budgets had a lot of really good cuts on it that Mick Mulvaney. He was one of my favorite members of Congress when he was a member from South Carolina. He designed some really good budgets. They weren't perfect, but some really good ones. And then Paul Ryan just kept avoiding these battles, right? Just kept kicking the can down the road. Unfortunately, now that we're running trillion plus deficits, I do think it hurts the card of, oh, well, how dare you complain about the left and promoting all these spending issues when you've been running the biggest deficits that we've seen in recent history. It undermines that argument. So I'd like to see him be more proactive in that regard. Of course, nobody really wants to deal with the political fallout of actually making the sort of cuts that you need. Yeah. And the biggest issue is just the global economy right now is a very weird situation, right? We've got, we've had a decade plus of monetary stimulus. Not just from the Fed, but from the ECB. China is, you can't even trust their numbers. And I think that how the U.S. I think it's very possible that we end up having a lot of global chaos go on in financial markets between now and the election. To Trump's credit, I think a lot of the moves that he's made, particularly on the regulatory end, if you're putting your money in a safe harbor, I mean, the U.S. is the best one out there. And so how we're able to ride out this market, if the entire economy, if the entire global economy goes down, then nobody gets out unscathed. But if we can kind of still be the best ship in the harbor, the most protected one out there, Trump may be able to avoid some of the fallout from that. But again, just continuing the anti-Washington, drain the swamp strategy that he went in there with. Yeah. People Trump's at his best when he fulfills his promises, right? That's what motivates his crowds. When he's able to do things that other politicians never had the stomach to do. And so if he can simply continues with that, I think that in part, because of the easy boogeyman the left has created for itself, I certainly wouldn't bet against him. The only thing I could think could stand in his way is if a really unconventional Democrat is somehow able to skate through the party.
Can you see someone on the other, does anyone stand out to you?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, like it's becoming more fun to talk about, but like Andrew Yang's campaign, I think is really weird. Is really interesting because I think it touches on to a lot of the cultural vibes that really drove Trump. I mean, we can talk about meme magic and this internet culture, and it's easy to laugh at, but I do think there's something there in the way that it elevates a campaign, where he's able to raise enough money and volunteers to get on the debate stage, right? And that's the first thing. And if you're a campaign promising $1,000 checks every month, there's a lot of people that are going to find that attractive, right? Sure. And so he's not a politician. He's not an old white guy, which is a big deal in the Democratic Party. If the Democrat doesn't knife him, which luckily the Democratic Party is still the least Democratic party in the U.S., he versus Trump would be a very interesting battle. I think a lot of what Yang has to say, particularly since he plays up to, he's not one of these Democrats that dismisses the real troubles of white, middle income, lower income Americans, right? He doesn't talk down to them. He doesn't have, he doesn't openly despise 50% of the country. So that's a massive campaign benefit. So someone like him, I mean, Tulsi Gabbard, I kind of like just because of the foreign policy stuff. I don't think she has any chance. The Democrats will never forgive the fact that she dare expose the corruption that was going on during the 2016 campaign. So she's going to, they never miss a chance of knifing her. So it would require, I think, one of those really outside the box sort of candidates to topple an outside the box Republican and Trump. Luckily, though, if you end up with either Camille Harris or Beto O'Rourke, I mean, I don't think Joe Biden's going anywhere. I think the only way they're going to be able to win the primary with their background is by flirting with the left to the point where it's going to be very difficult to swerve back. And so, again, barring a very bad economic situation for the U.S., which I think is possible, but I'm not forecasting. You can't rule it out, but I'm not assuming. I think Trump's in a very good position, in part because the Democratic Party has moved so far to the extremes, where, again, when the Speaker of the House can't defend its young rising star, then they really are facing some troubles.
Amen to that, man. I just, and I was a Democrat, a diehard, and, I just grew up. I listened to people like you, and, I just started working in the world, and like the government's taking everything from me. So I kind of moved from that socialist mindset, and I moved to more of a capitalism, mindset. And I think, plus I know what hardship is, and I just, it's going to be very interesting. I say this all the time, but it's going to be very interesting how this all unravels.
Yeah. Well, the biggest issue is that, and this is kind of what we're all these debates about what's going on in Washington miss, is that what is the ultimate solution here? Because I don't think there is, the divide that you have in this country is so great.
Yeah.
Again, I'm half the country openly despises the other half, and many cases, vice versa. And maybe it's 30-30, right? But we're a very divided country, and more importantly, we have a federal government that has become so large. I mean, so much. How can you have a constitutional republic when its where its top governing body is an inherently unconstitutional legislature? I mean, that's what we're dealing with. And I think that a lot of the debates over spending, will you ever have the political will to actually make the sort of spending cuts that you need to get the future debt down to workable levels? I don't think so. And so I think one of the big issues that both the left and the right should be embracing is looking back to the wisdom of the founders and appreciating the value of decentralization. And breaking down, so recognizing that if you are AOC and you want to recreate society in this eco-socialistic dream, right? Well, then let you do it in your state, right? If Bernie Sanders wants to have universal health care, let Vermont try to do it. Now, Vermont tried to do that, and they decided it couldn't work financially. But then let's go the next step further, right? Most of our tax money goes to Washington. In Switzerland, for example, most of your tax money stays in your local government. More goes to your state, canton, and the least amount goes to the federal government. To me, this is a sort of solution that it doesn't matter where you are on the political spectrum, right? If you are, if you're Ron Paul in Texas and you're Bernie Sanders in Vermont, this lets you both have success. It lets you lets you decide what sort of government you actually live under.
Well, it gives power back to the states.
That was the entire purpose of the federal, the Swiss Constitution was directly inspired by American federalism. The problem is Americans abandoned it, and that is the solution to all our problems. Because if you can decide what sort of government you live under, then you have the freedom to choose. And we're seeing this play out already, right? AOC's mom moves to Florida because she doesn't like the property taxes in New York. Well, again, you have that freedom to opt out of a very oppressive New York state regime. if you simply take that same concept and apply it throughout the federal government, because if that doesn't happen, then it's half the country trying to dominate and impose their will on the other half. And the other half, whether it's red or blue, increasingly doesn't like that. And that creates a very dangerous situation, and creates this sort of environment where you have violent protests like we're seeing in France. We're seeing all the dysfunction that Europe has, where the EU was trying to replicate this post-constitutional Washington on an entire continent. That creates a very dangerous situation. And so that's why I think that, it's so important for conservatives and even I try to sell my leftist friends on this all the time, identifying that the enemy is not red versus blue. It's Washington versus the rest of the country.
That's good.
And that's what Trump was able to tap into so much with Drain the Swamp. And that's the message that I think is not just important for Trump in 2020, but important for America as a whole, because that's the only way that we're able to restore not just the republic and these idealistic values of 1776, but just restore any sort of political normalcy in the environment that we have right now.
No, I appreciate it. Thank you. And I love your work. I love your articles. I love your perspective, and especially coming from the left, the other side. I won't say the evil side, the dark side. But I think people need to get educated.
Absolutely.
To do your own research, and I really encourage everyone to check out the Mises Institute and really just kind of do your own research, make up your own mind. Don't let me or anyone else influence you. Make up your mind. The facts are the facts.
Absolutely.
And
one of the great things about Austrian economics, which is what we focus on, is that you don't need a PhD in math to understand the concepts. It's very reason driven. It's written in plain language.
Yes.
And it'll change your life.
Well, and it's digestible, like you said. And to someone like me that's not, an economic major, I'm like, oh goodness, it's not intimidating. It's not intimidating, and you need to get educated. Educate yourself, everyone. Well, thank you, ladies, and thank you, sir, so much for coming on my show. I am deeply honored, and if you don't mind, I would love to have you back, because I'm sure there's going to be some more things that we can discuss.
Be happy. This is a great time. Would love to be back. Thank you.
Thank you so much.